Right, so welcome to everybody who's come along today. In July, Bangladesh was rocked by colossal youth uprising in protest at the mass unemployment, as everybody probably knows. Hundreds of young people were brutally mown down, but despite that, they stood firm and the government was overthrown, and Sheikh Hasina fled the country. Bangladesh has a gigantic proletariat which produces over 50% of the world's textile output. To what extent was the working in this protest movement? Can it mobilize its forces around a socialist program and spread the revolution beyond the country's border? So there's lots of questions about this, and we have with us this week Omar Abdul, who's leader of the Revolutionary Students Front of Pakistan, who's going to give us a brief introduction for 15 to 20 minutes, and then I shall throw the meeting open to discussion. So, Omar, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you, Comrade Chair. First of all, it's an honor and it's a pleasure being with you here and to discuss a very important event that happened recently, which had lessons for resistance movements of working class and oppressed across the world, of course, and especially in South Asia. Before I could go into the movement itself, to put things into context. Uh, South Asia is going through a sort of a political upheaval for last couple of years, especially post COVID. We have seen a formidable movement that erupted in Sri Lanka, where they together ousted the government of the corrupt government of Rajapakse. And then later we saw another movement in May this year, um, where people from Pakistan administered Jammu Kashmir not only uh, were successful in beating and in defeating the whole colonial state apparatus that works there, and they won the right of cheap electricity. Although there have been now attempts to curtail the movement, and right now when I speak, there are several political workers that have been charged um, um, with treason for being part of the movement and so on. But it was a victory nevertheless, and for a change, because for decades of political stagnation, I think it was a huge movement that. And then, of course, in July we saw the Bangladeshi movement, mainly led by students. Of course, they were working class also became part of the movement later on, but not as an organized political force, but as masses. But nevertheless, they became a part of it, and they were not only able to successfully revoke the infamous quota. I will later on go into the detail, but they were also able to successfully overthrow the tyrant and the blood-sucking tyrant Sina Wajid, who has been in power for a couple of decades. Um, and and then there was, of course, the movement, a small movement in Calcutta regarding when of the working class and the youth for a fellow doctor who was unfortunately raped there. And then there are elections, and we can clearly see that the people in across the world, but especially in South Asia, are now tired of the neoliberal economic policies of IMF and World Bank, of austerity and privatization, and of course the historical failure of the capitalist states, especially in the third world, where it could not become a healthy capitalism. And then and also there's a youth bulge, of course, across the world, but in South Asia, more than 60-70% people are under 35, may it be Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or Pakistan or India. And for last couple of decades, a story was built that there is a future, a bright future waiting for them, and there is growth and all that nonsense. Just before the movement erupted in Bangladesh, the World Bank and IMF were predicting 6% growth in Bangladesh, and this was the mirage or the mythical stories created by neoliberalism on paper of growth and prosperity, they are now shaken, and the youth is doesn't see any future. And given the crisis of the capitalism, the states that are operating in this region do not have any other option but to crush every single, even the slightest resistance. And on the other hand, the young people and the working class also see no way out of it other than to fight it out and to ultimately destroy uh, capitalism. Although they are not there yet, but I think the South Asia is going to see many other movements and political upheavals in coming future. Now, coming uh, to the movement in Bangladesh. Obviously, I think all of you must be aware of the context. Bangladesh is a very young state which won its independence in 1971 from Pakistan, and before it was part of the Indian subcontinent, and then the whole colonizing project came, and after 150 years of plunder and resources, they left and they divided the country on the basis of religion, and especially the Bangladesh and Punjab were two main epicenters of the movement, anti-colonial and anti-imperialist movement, and that's why it was they divided Punjab, and they divided the Bangladesh to carve out a country called Pakistan, which was a failure from the very beginning. The people, it was the East Pakistan and the West Pakistan, and the East Pakistan, which is now called Bangladesh, immediately started to feel national oppression, and they started resisting it. And then, of course, the 1968 and 69 revolutionary upheaval and revolutionary movement that again began with students, and it began with the murder of a student in Rawalpindi, where I'm speaking to you, from where I'm speaking to you, and it spread across Pakistan and across Bangladesh at that time, which was part of Pakistan, and they were able to successfully overthrow Ayub Khan, which was a stooge of American imperialism, and also and then they overthrew that dictator, but the movement could not materialize into a socialist revolution because of lack of party, and then Ayub Khan and the move and the state was able to divert the movement into elections and civil war, and the operation started in Bangladesh, and it was a brutal operation. A frenzy of rape and murder was initiated in Bangladesh, where uh, according to some estimates, from 300,000 to 3 million people were affected and victims of rape and murder and all that. But despite that, Bangladesh was able to win the freedom, and that movement started with the students. Eventually, the working class and the peasantry also joined them, and they were able to win the freedom. But fast forward 40 years, still Bangladesh was not able to become even a somewhat moderate social welfare state. The conditions right now, the working conditions and the gap between rich and the poor is colossal. But there are factories in Bangladesh that are death traps, and especially for women and children. And we see here and there some strikes and protests also going on in the working class. But this current movement, uh, if I come to it, was against a quota system, which was introduced in 1971, and it was basically in 3,000 civil service jobs, and 56% were reserved. 26 of it was for women and for backward districts and marginalized communities um, uh, other, but the 30% of it went to the veterans and their families and their children and their grandchildren even, of 1971 war veterans who fought in the liberation war. And initially it might have been a compensation to them, but later on it became, especially under the rule of Hasina Wajid, it became a tool of political bribing and maintaining power and status quo. And students were fed up with the system. But here is a thing. Um Almost 400,000 graduates compete for 3,000 jobs, and they were so the situation is so dire that they wanted to die for it, and they did. As Comrade mentioned in the introduction, hundreds of students were killed during this movement, and this was not some spontaneous reaction, because in 2018 a similar movement against a similar quota system was erupted, and at that time it was also success. It was also a successful movement. Hasina Wajid was forced to revoke the quota in 2018, and even though at that time several hundreds of students were killed, but six years later, through Supreme Court, they again tried to reinforce and reinstate the quota. And this time, students were not only organizationally prepared, they had a leadership, they also had the experience of the last movement. So it was not kind of a instantaneous knee-jerk reaction, but the preparation was there. And it was led by uh, it was an anti-discrimination quota movement. It was led by Gautantrik student power, Republican student power. The two of the students that are member of the interim government right now were part of that organization, who led the Nashad and Asif, who led the movement, and the committee that was leading this movement had other center left, radical left parties and organizations that were um, um, so the overarching leadership was composed of organized left wing or center left kind of organizations. There's this misconception that somehow the fundamentalists have infiltrated the movement and they are controlling everything is nothing but false. Although I've never been to Bangladesh, but I was observing this movement closely, and I also had an opportunity to talk to some of our friends who were fighting in the battlefield. So the point is that they were successful in overthrowing Hasina Wajid, and the movement became successful. Um, of course, it was not just one reason. There is massive unemployment, and there's massive uncertainty, and there is then the authoritarian rule that curtailed all kinds of opposition and uh, political opportunities in Bangladesh, and there was this Digital Rights Act which allowed the police and the state to arrest political people without any warrant, and so this whole situation boiled up towards this. And then there was this propaganda against the movement. First, this was that the fundamentalist has appeared, and Bangladesh is somehow going to become in Afghanistan in near future. So although there was a brief point where we saw students or young people vandalizing uh, the statues of the heroes of the liberation war, and also there were some reports of attacks on Hindu mandirs and etc etc. But it was just a brief movement where when the state was not the Sina Wajid fled, and there was an uncertainty, and the fundamentalist groups that are present, they are not in a very formidable or organized form, but they are there. They tried to do this, but the movement was so organized, and they immediately formed committees that took the control of the security, and not a single incident has been reported since then. And also the very next day, uh, hundreds and thousands of Hindu young students and youth and workers protested, and in Dhaka, and they were joined by the Muslim students and other ethnic minorities. So it was a propaganda propelled by the Indian state, which was scared. First, but Sina Wajid was close ally of Modi and BJP, and they were also afraid that this movement can trigger a similar movement in India, because at that time there was some similar issues regarding entry test and civil service test was also going on in India. So they were scared of it, and they started this whole propaganda that Jamaat-e-Islami, the traditional Islamic party in both India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, is behind this whole protest. And Pakistani state and Pakistani Jamaat-e-Islami also took part in it. And the Stalinists, who were not part of the movement, they also were like that. This is a movement, and this is going to become Bangladesh, and etc. and etc. etc. But the point is, that I don't think so. According to my personal experience, in any movement or any place where such a large number of women participation is going on, and they're fighting on the front lines, the forces like Jamaat-e-Islami cannot prevail in such conditions. And also because of the movement of of 1971 and the liberation, at that time these fundamentalist groups these fundamentalist groups were part of the Pakistani regime, and they were part of those all those murders and rape and all that. And Bangladesh, the memory in Bangladesh is still fresh. So I don't personally think that Bangladesh is soon, at least for now, is not going towards becoming going into a reaction or towards fundamentalism. Even although now when the Awami National Party, the national the Hasina Wajid's party is been removed from power, it has opened an opportunity for BNP, Bangladesh National Party, Khalda Zia's party, which is a center-right party, and it also has ties with fundamentalism. But given the current condition of the movement, and the way Nashad and Asif, who were part of the member of the cabinet, they have made it very clear that we want an election as soon as possible, but we don't want it before we can make sure that the laws are in place, and fascism is curtailed, and it cannot find itself.
15 minutes now.
Yeah, I'm just finishing up.
Okay.
So so they have made it very clear that they are going to contest the election, and there is a discussion of a party as well, which I think is going to be formed in near future. What will become of that party? We can discuss it. We can also discuss it, but it will not be even easy for BNP to take power, let alone push the society into fundamentalist reaction. So, and then again, there was this whole scenario where because the students themselves called for Dr. Yunus to come to Bangladesh and take charge of the interim government. And then there was another whole discussion that CIA, because he is a blue-eyed poster boy of neoliberalism and the American imperialism and the financial imperialism. So this is basically, this whole phenomena was backed by CIA against Hasina Wajid, because she didn't want to give bases to United States, and all this. This is the same trope and same political narrative that we see in Pakistan as well. When Imran Khan was ousted from power, he said that I said absolutely not to the Americans, and that's why I was ousted by power. And now, right now, just in the recent election, his party, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, has openly supported Trump in his campaign. So the same tropes were involved. First of all, I don't think that CIA or any force, for that matter, on this planet can start a movement that in which thousands of hundreds of thousands of students are willing to sacrifice their life. And we have seen through social media, we have seen images where young people are standing in front of the police firing squad, and they're taking bullets to the chest, and we've seen it live in the TV. And I don't think that and even though if momentarily if the objectives of the imperialists or the fundamentalists coincide with the movement, it doesn't mean that they have a complete control over the movement. Of course, students are basically, this movement could not uh, spread to the working class. Working class didn't enter into the movement as an organized force. So, and then students generally are opportunists, or especially students that are able to go to get higher education. They have on their consciousness is burdened with personalities like Dr. Yunus, which has been bombarded onto their consciousness through media and through curricula, and he's a Nobel laureate and all that, and is a philanthropist, and then they have this whole burden, and that's why they called for him. And I think, although the leadership of the movement is optimistic that they can create a democratic and economically prosperous Bangladesh, But of course, I think this is their idealism speaking, and sooner or later, because the state is not going to forgive them for this rebellion, and sooner or later they are going to cut back, and this idealism will have to face the harsh realities of capitalism itself, and the advanced layers and the conscious layers will obviously take a step forward. As far as the party is concerned, right now they are trying to build a party that can uh, speak to the larger layers of the working class and the masses. But I think the chances for it is very bleak, because I don't think that students might trigger a movement, but I don't think that they can uh, they can lead the working class. Obviously, it has to be the working class that has to be on the front lines. But if they can build up a program and include the working class in it, it will be a very formidable new the party of the working class. But I think the chances for it is they are bleak. But nevertheless, I'll conclude that this movement has great lessons for the working class in Bangladesh, for the working class across the world, and it has also given a kind of energy to the working class, and we see that the working class of Bangladesh is suffering from inflation, unemployment, um, massive unemployment, privatization, high electricity prices, and the conditions are not great. And we see here and there in strikes of the working class in factories, in banks across Bangladesh, which depict that in future the Bangladeshi proletariat and the working class, as you said in the introduction, which is a gigantic proletariat, if there are chances that this movement may push the working class and the proletariat onto the stage of history. And when the proletariat of Bangladesh will move, it will not only have its gigantic impacts on the region, but it will send tremors across the world. Thank you.
Right, thanks so much. That's a really excellent introduction. I found it extremely invigorating to listen to. I don't know about anybody else. So I'm going to throw the meeting up to the discussion now. We've got Ian's hand up. If anybody else would like to speak, please put your hand up and I'll call you in turn. Ian.
Hi, thanks. It was a very interesting introduction. And first of all, just to say I agree from what I've seen of the movement myself, that this is an organic thing that emerged against Hasina, who'd been in for a very long time, I think 15 years, as a semi-dictatorial leader, winning less and less free elections, including one, I think, just this January, and not simply a US coup or a military coup. I think the army chief who was forced to force her out of power was himself a relative, and a relatively recent appointment, so a crony. So I think that's somewhat of a red herring. She said afterwards that she'd refused the US a base. That's why they got rid of her. It certainly sounds like the US's style, shall we say. It sounds plausible. That doesn't mean it's true, but it certainly sounds plausible. But when you look at the mechanics of it, the student movement a few years before, the whole toing and froing with this increasingly corrupt quota scheme, and so on, there were domestic reasons for the thing happening. And where Hasina's argument really falls down, I don't know if Omar or other comrades have heard of this, but I saw in a pro-Hasina video straight after it happened, her saying that she'd been asked to cede some Bangladeshi territory for a new Christian country. I don't know if there's any Bangladeshi territory with a Christian majority. That would be some kind of East Timor, which itself was a legitimate national liberation struggle against the pro-US Suharto fascist regime in Indonesia. So that was also a bit wrong to say that because it was Christian, it was more pro-US than the Muslim Indonesian regime, actually, as it happens. And that would be a US gendarme in the region that would link up with Christian parts of Burma, which there are. But that when she's also saying she's standing against the Islamists and the fundamentalists, it sounds like at the point of desperation, she was sort of playing that card herself. So I just wonder what comrades think of that. And I do think the US, even if it wasn't behind the thing, will try, of course, to intervene. I don't think that they'd have set off a movement against a big supporter of Modi. I think that one was something that was nicely under control without the intrusion of the masses on history for them. But that doesn't mean that they won't try and exploit a power vacuum. Interestingly, there's also a link to UK politics. Hasina's niece is, I think, a junior Treasury Minister in Keir Starmer's government, a member of the right wing of the Labour Party, and Bangladeshi politics on the ground in Britain and in Labour is often linked to the Awami League and divisions back home. I do see somewhere that the Awami League was banned, and despite all the abuses that it's inflicted in the last period in power, I don't know if there's a democratic case perhaps for saying that at least is wrong and it should be allowed to compete. I also see even in the business press this week in The Economist, they were saying that Yunus is perhaps taking too long to call elections. I don't know if they're doing that for their own reasons, and from some of what Omar said, it sounds like maybe they are, but just to go into that danger again, especially if they take too long, the military might move in, as we've seen in a few countries recently, Sudan and so on. But one thing I'd like to say about Pakistan, I do think it's slightly different with Imran Khan's removal, which wasn't by a mass movement, but by a conspiracy in parliament, defections of his MPs, and the hand of the military, straight after he went to Russia and didn't toe the line on NATO and Ukraine. So that does seem a lot more suspect than what happened with Hasina. Plus, the mass movement in Pakistan seems to be more against the new government rather than the Imran government, whereas in Bangladesh it was a movement against the old government that's now got a toehold within the new government. So it does seem like a slightly different situation there, both the position of imperialism and of the grassroots. So I just wonder what Omar thinks of that as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. We'll take a few contributions first, Omar, if that's okay, and then if you'd like to respond to what comrades have said or any questions that have been asked. Roger.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much to Omar for a really, really clear and comprehensive explanation of the situation. I wanted to just make a few points, putting it into context. First of all, I don't think it'd be hard to find any population anywhere in the world with such traditions of struggle as in Bangladesh. It goes back for 150 years or more. The traditions are such that every generation has gone through the most intense upheavals and really of bloodbaths again and again and again. First of all, in the early part of the 20th century, it was in Bengal that the British imperialists first decided to play their role of divide and rule, and they literally just vivisected. They just drove a complete line through Bengal, which was a united province, and they divided it between East and West Bengal. East being for the Muslims and West being for the East being for the Muslims and West being for the Hindu populations of Bengal. And they did that because of the traditions of struggle that had already been building up, the huge resistance, the incredible resistance culturally, politically, and in terms of movements on the streets against British imperialism. And it was in Bengal, that partition of Bengal was really the prototype or the model for the later partition of the entire Indian subcontinent. And it was, which of course has led to untold misery, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in fact, actually millions of deaths again and again. One of the worst crimes of British imperialism in the whole of its history. Then, of course, remember that during the Second World War, you had the inflicted famine of Bengal, which was deliberately imposed by Churchill in order to rob the Bengali population of the fruits of agriculture to feed British troops. And then you had the creation of Pakistan, which again led to millions of deaths, where people were just transported. The most appalling outbreak of carnage and torture and mutilation of people, incredible crime. Then, of course, the creation of Pakistan, which was, as Comrade Omar said, was a complete and utter abortion, complete monstrous. A country which didn't even have territorial integrity, and of entirely different cultural traditions, languages, etc., etc. The only thing that united them, allegedly, was their religious orientation. And so no wonder that it didn't take long. The next generation went through the secession of Bangladesh, the secession of East Bengal, or East Pakistan, as it was called, and the creation of Bangladesh. I think there were 3 million people who died in that conflict alone. An incredible, just a monstrous bloodbath. So, and since that, I think it's also interesting, very important to point out one element in the tradition is in 1975, when Mujibur Rahman, the original founder of and the leader of the secession and the founder in that sense of Bangladesh, when he was when there was a revolt and they got rid of him, I mean a coup. There were then a series of upheavals. At one point, there was almost a Soviet was created, a council of junior army officers who really represented, if you like, the students in uniform, who actually created. There was a period of a week or two. It didn't last very long, but when they actually held the power and they tried to impose, not to impose, they tried to enforce, or they tried to initiate if you like, a workers and a peasants government, and that they were overthrown in the reactionary military coup of General Zia. And since then, the two political parties just represent the two opposing dynasties. The dynasty of Sheikh Hasina, which was the daughter of Sheikh Mujib, and the dynasty of the widow of General Zia, the military dictator who replaced him. And so we all know the slave driving in the textile factories, the fact that, Comrade Umar referred to the fires just as one example of the callous neglect of the conditions of the working class there, where there was a fire the last, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, which was in which was it hundreds of workers were killed, I think, or somewhere near to that. And it shocked the world because it was an example of the brutal exploitation of the textile workers. So we have a situation, nevertheless, where in the last few years, Bangladesh has been booming, and it's one of the so-called success stories on the basis, of course, of the slavery, the enslavement of the working class, and the brutal exploitation and the blood-sucking of the working class that transpired. But it's in that sense, it was a bit of a shock to the ruling class to see this movement, because there's a parallel which I've given before, but the parallel of India, which is also a booming sort of success story on paper, where it's from I think 10th in world league tables in terms of gross domestic product. It's now come to number 5. And Modi is bragging and boasting that we're going to overtake America and all the rest of it. But what has happened is the boom has not filtered down to the mass of the population in any sense whatsoever. There's a tiny handful of billionaires and plutocrats at the top. The first of the world's dollar trillionaires is expected to be Elon Musk, but the second is an Indian capitalist, Ambani, who's going to be the second dollar trillionaire. It's that kind of a very narrow elite which is prospering. For the mass of the population, and particularly for the youth, there's misery, exploitation, and unemployment. And this question of youth unemployment, I've used the phrase before, it's a ticking time bomb in India. And we see the truth of that by what happened in Bangladesh. The fact that there's a boom for the, as far as the ruling class is concerned, has made no difference to the conditions of the working class, and particularly the youth, who can see absolutely no future ahead of them. And so I'd like to finish on that point. We saw the massive upsurge. The comrades would have seen the videos, the newsreels, and so on, of just an incredible ocean, a torrent of where the youth simply just took over the streets, and they, despite hundreds of them being mown down, they stuck it out. They continued to the well, I was going to say to the bitter end, but at least to the expulsion of the Prime Minister, of Hasina, in an echo really of the expulsion of the dictator in Sri Lanka. And it is the whole subcontinent is very much in marching in step as far as that is concerned. And that's why it's very good to have the comrade from Pakistan here, who can tell us more how that relates to the situation in Pakistan too, where, as Ian said, yeah, it's not quite the same thing. Imran Khan was overthrown by a reactionary military coup, and not by a mass protest movement. But it's a sign of the instability, and the last word is still to come, not only in Bangladesh but in Pakistan as well. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, comrades.
Roger. We'll move on to John or Dominic.
John speaking. It's just two questions, basically. The first question is that in Britain, there is a large Bangladeshi population. I know several Bangladeshis myself. I'd like to know if there's any organisation in Britain, if you like, linking up with what's happening in Bangladesh, as I say, that would be orientated towards socialism. The second question, I didn't quite understand it at the time. You mentioned that some politician in Pakistan was backing Trump. If you could just clarify who that was it Imran Khan, or was it part of the ruling elite? I can't see it being Imran Khan, but stranger things have happened. It's just those two questions, basically. Thank you. And thanks for the lead off, which I found very interesting.
Okay, thanks, John. Finn.
Sorry, Pam.
Yes, you now, Finn. Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't hear you.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, comrades, I want to thank Omar for a very informative and stimulating opening contribution. So I want to make a few brief points, and then to ask a couple of questions similarly. First of all, as the other comrades have said, I want to recognize the immense bravery and commitment of the youth and student movement in Bangladesh, facing weaponry and facing certain death, but nonetheless continuing the struggle. It reminded me, particularly in the conclusion of it, with the coming to power of Yunus, of some of the events in the Arab Spring. We had a mass movement, for example, in Egypt that overthrew Mubarak, but then a vacuum which developed enabled Morsi to come to power, another uprising or movement against him, and then Sisi coming. So the vacuum that existed in Egypt is something we need to look at, because the question I want to examine is, was there an involvement by the organized working class, by the trade union movement, in the youth protests that happened in May? And if so, is a leadership emerging in the class? And part of the reason I'm asking that is because the IMF have loaned something like $4.7 billion to the government in Bangladesh, and the IMF isn't a charitable organization or a benevolent body. They'll want that money back, and they always lay down very strict conditions for the repayment of the money. They don't just say there's a check in the post, spend it as you wish. They demand changes to public ownership, to wages, to social welfare conditions, to health spending, and so on. So I'm asking, is there a possibility of a big resistance to the IMF demands for the repayment, as they will expect, of this loan? The question about Trump is interesting because Hasina went to India and was supported by Modi, and to some extent there's issues there about sectarian and religious divisions emerging as well. Now, even though the Islamist party, I think it's called Jamaat-e-Islam, was outlawed by Hasina, nonetheless, the question arises all the time of the exploitation of religious and sectarian divisions by the capitalist class. So I'm interested, it was very good the way you've explained there, Omar, the way in which the organised opposition to the government made sure that there wasn't a sectarian aspect to the struggle, and they managed to bring together Hindu and Muslim students and workers together in the movement. But that may not last in the absence of a consistent leadership. That unity which you've explained, and it's very inspiring that such a thing can happen at all. It's good to hear that this organised attempt to outlaw or to prevent the escalation of religious or sectarian divisions, that's very good. But we're dealing with a very serious force here, which Trump and the likes of him can exploit. Another question I want to ask relates to the Awami League. Now, I know they've been around a long time, and I know they've discredited and that they preserved jobs to themselves and were a corrupt regime, and that's why they were overthrown. But nonetheless, I'm wondering, is there a residue of support still in Bangladesh for the Awami League because of the role they played in the revolution, in the uprisings of the early 70s? It reminds me a bit of what's happening in Ireland, which is where I live, where the revolutionary traditions of the independence struggle were kind of captured by some political parties, like, for example, Fianna Fáil, which is a ruling conservative capitalist party here, but they can still lean into the independence struggle for support to differentiate themselves. I'm wondering, does the Awami League still carry a residue? Now, I know there was a mass movement against them and they were overturned and so on, but is there a residue of support still for the Awami League, or are they completely discredited? Another issue I'd like to maybe have a look at is, because of the big divisions between the BNP, the Nationalist Party, and the Awami League, is there the possibility of the army intervening to seize power in that conflict situation? And I know these are really a lot of questions, but I'd like to hear some discussion of them. Another one relates to China. China has a huge involvement, or is intending to have a huge involvement in Bangladesh. And what influence is that having, or what influence might it have in the developing situation in Bangladesh? Now, I've made some points and asked some questions, and there's probably too much stuff there, maybe for a single summing up, but I want to throw the issues out for discussion. If there's other comrades from India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh, I'd like to hear their ideas on these questions. So thanks again, Omar, for a very stimulating and a very, very interesting opening contribution.
I know there's a lot of questions come up, and I thought if we just take the two Carol and Temos who've got their hands up, and then maybe Omar, if you'd like to come back in and attempt to tackle that barrage of questions you had thrown at you. So, Carol, do you want to go next?
Yeah, first, in answer to Roger's query about how many people died in that fire, I think it was over 1,000. And they were like largely women. So women and children are basically the ones working in the textile factories in Bangladesh. But, just to go back to history, some of which Roger was talking about, it's so clear how borders, it's absurd. This is one place, and besides, there are a lot of other places, right? But clearly, the borders are ones that were created by British imperialism, and other than that, these people basically lived in communities, and it was British imperialism with the division of, Pakistan and India. But Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was the lead person who was pushing for it, also was somebody who participated in the division. So you have all of these corrupt people who support Britain in its quest to dominate the subcontinent. The Indian Communist Party supported the division also. And all of this is to say that borders are what we need as working class people is internationalism, not borders. Borders are oppressive and separate people and pit people against each other, as opposed to fighting for an internationalist perspective, which unfortunately the Communist Party didn't do at the time of the division because, they had to answer to Stalin and the Soviet Union. My question is, for Omer, is there a Workers' Party that's growing in two things? Is there a Workers' Party that's growing in Bangladesh? And are they reaching out to workers in quote India and quote workers in Pakistan? And I mean, as I said, all of these are fake constructs that were created by the British, but the working class is the only class, the only group that thinks internationally. And so we have to build that internationalist perspective, develop a working class party that will, go throughout the entire region and start, counterposing ourselves as workers to all of these independent, individual, reactionary parties that focus on either religion or their location, all of which is just going to pit people against each other and ultimately end up in more destruction and more capitalism and more destruction, especially against the working class. So that's my question. Is there a working class movement that wants to build a party and connect with the rest of the subcontinent?
Thanks, Carol. Temos?
Yes, I don't know much about Bangladesh. In fact, I learned more in these 20 minutes of a very clear and precise description by Omer. And I'm very grateful for that. And it seems that it's a typical case of a country that cannot really have a revolution, a clear revolution, a socialist revolution by itself. We have seen it in the Arab Spring. We have seen it in many other countries that a revolution starts mainly. It is not organized. It starts completely by itself, by the workers or the students or a group of repressed people. And the perspective of such a revolution are usually a bit problematic in the sense that without any other revolution developing, is bound to lead either to a sort of Western democracy experiments that lead to what we've seen in many countries with the disastrous results, or fundamentalism, or things like this. And this we say that is the lack of working class mass party, revolutionary party, and this is true. But this lack of the party is not accidental. It is ironic that I usually say that it's wrong to take a Lenin template and try to impose it on another country, especially if we are talking about the advanced countries and this sort of thing, and that we have to be very careful about the specificities of the situation. Nevertheless, in Bangladesh, it seems to me that it's a Leninist template that is developing there, and it's the sort of revolution that it can have no future without an internationalist program around which to gather the working class, and this I think is the sort of thing that should be in our minds when we develop a program for revolutionary work in countries like Bangladesh. And this means that we have to see ourselves the way Lenin saw Russia in 1905, for example, or this sort of thing. Is these comparisons that come to mind when I hear these descriptions. And so building links with the working class is crucial. Creating a program it's again very important so that people can educate themselves in the revolutionary way of thinking rather than acting. Is more a preparation at this time, I think, for the revolution. Of course, we take part in every possible action that happens, but our vision should be a bit longer term, in the sense that if we create a network of revolutionaries in Bangladesh with connections to the working class, building, if possible, a working class party, and also making international links is the way to go to continue the Russian analogy to a February in which we can navigate the way Lenin navigated. And we know that the Bolsheviks were making a mess of the whole thing in February until Lenin's April thesis. But he had already these groups of revolutionaries. He had this party, the Discipline Party, which they managed to turn and go to October. So for me, is this description that we heard today is a sort of hopeful situation in which the working class and the Marxists can work and build towards a revolution that it could start spontaneously, but in which we could work and we could bring results and we could trigger revolutions in India, in Pakistan, and the rest of the world. I mean, Bangladesh is not an insignificant little country. It's a huge country which will not be easy to suppress if a revolution develops in the way the Russian Revolution did.
Thanks very much, Temos. I think, in fairness to Omar, we need to just give you a chance to answer some of these questions. Would you like to do that now, and then we'll take the remaining speakers?
Yeah, I think I should do it now before the questions pile up. It was a great conversation. I learned a lot from this conversation, especially the contribution by Comrade Roger about the brutal and bloody history of the Indian subcontinent, which we all share, all three so-called countries, as the comrade mentioned, what are borders to us. It was the Comrade Roger mentioned the famine, the infamous Bangladeshi famine that was created by the British imperialists, and it was the same famine about which the crooked Churchill infamously said that they breed like rats, and so let them die. So yeah, there are the crimes of the British imperialism cannot be counted. Millions have died through famine and through partition and through all. It is a painful, bloody history, but it is also a history of resistance, as he mentioned, and especially in Bangladesh, it has been a continuous, and especially the students at the helm of this resistance, with every generation coming resisting the authoritarians and ousting dictators, and so on. As far as the questions are concerned, first of all, about the delayed elections, as I mentioned in my opening, that the they want to have elections as soon as possible. But the students that are part of the cabinet, and that also are the now leaders and the faces of the movement, they have stated again and again that we want an election as soon as possible, but we cannot have elections without structural reforms, so that we can stop something happening, something what was happened early on with Hasina Wajid and all that. So one of the reason the elections are delayed is because the student movement and the leaders themselves don't want an early election. All, of course, it need not to mention that the state and the ruling classes will are only buying time, and they will eventually take, if you may, take revenge from these movements who have rebelled and who have ridiculed them in such a colossal manner. So obviously this delayed election can be exploited, but on the other hand, which is related to the other questions about the party. So in Bangladesh, Awami League has been the traditional party of the people and the masses since 1971, and now the party has been dismantled in a way that the masses have rejected them, and the chances for them to come back to power are very little, because as there were some reports where the Chhatra League, the student wing of the Awami League, who were at the forefront in brutalizing the protesters, are now hiding, and they cannot even reveal their identity as Awami League. The students have left universities and they're not coming to the classes. And right now there is a huge reaction towards Awami League. Although it is a party, of course, it has its sympathizers and its workers and people who benefited from the Hasina Wajid's rule. They are still part of the Bangladeshi society, but I don't see them holding on to power anytime soon. As far as the working class party is concerned, of course, the reports, as I was talking to friends in Bangladesh, the student movement wants to create a party, and it wants to create a working class party. They want the working class to be part of it. But then again, as I mentioned, that it is, I don't know how is it possible then that the working class will become a part of a student party. So if that happens, it will be a party that I don't think that Arab Spring can be repeated if they are successful in bringing in the working class and the larger layers of the masses into the party, which can happen, but the chances are very low. The problem with this movement was that can the working class did become part of the movement, but not as trade unions, as parties, as with a political program or demands or anything like that. They became a part of the movement as masses, as individuals, as in a different capacity. So that was one of the reasons. One of the limitation of the movement is that it could not move past beyond the students, and hence the overall character of the students is not always revolutionary, and so it got stuck into if you may, petty bourgeois aspirations and reformism, and the people who are leading the movement are also belong to center left parties who want reforms and who want democratic reforms and economic reforms. But if they are able to if they fail to bring in the working class into this new party that they want to create, obviously it will have its own limitations, and there will be a vacuum of power that can be exploited by all imperialist powers, including US, China, but also India. India has now become some sort of a regional imperialist power across South Asia, and there is a massive resentment as well in the Bangladesh, the people of Bangladesh and in Sri Lanka against India. So all the powers will try to exploit this vacuum. But as far as building of a working class party is concerned, obviously, as some comrade mentioned, that this whole crisis was exacerbated after Bangladesh went into the IMF program post-COVID. and they started to impose austerity and the privatization and all those policies, which jacked up the electricity prices, and which created all those problems that it creates everywhere across the world. So obviously there is a movement of the students, and there's a working class, the building of resentment and they can eventually, these reforms, this IMF program that Bangladesh is right now, can trigger a working class movement as well, especially being with the student movement alongside, still intact. So there's that. As far as the questions about Imran Khan, and I didn't mean to say that it was exactly same. I made an analogy about the how the ruling classes use this anti-American sentiment for their own personal gains. Obviously, Imran Khan was not ousted by a popular movement, and it was a military coup. And it was not just that he went to Ukraine and the United States didn't want him in the power. It was also the internal struggle within the factions of the state, the faction that supports Imran Khan, the deep state or ISI, or all those people, and the faction that is in power right now. There's a split, and that split is getting the sharper and sharper with one half of the state, the reactionary half of the state that believes in Afghanistan as strategic depths, and Islam as the Pakistan as the bastion of Islam, and all that ideology, and also good Taliban, bad Taliban, the Faiz Hamid, the ex-ISI chief, who is now arrested and is being tried for a court martial. So that this was the internal rift between the state that then they brought Imran Khan into the power. It was backed by the establishment. They brought him into the power, but in 3.5 years, when Imran Khan started to believe that he is the prime minister, and he is actually the one who is wielding the power, the military ousted him. So the analogy I made was that the Hasina Wajid and Imran Khan both are using same kind of a narrative. Obviously, there can be differences between the state, but obviously they are not anti-imperialist or anti-American in any sense. Somebody even asked a question about which party supported Trump. It was Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. It was Imran Khan's party that officially supported the Trump in the recent election in US. And it is amazing because when he was ousted from the power, he used this anti-American sentiment to prop up the popularity that he enjoyed for last 2.5 years. That I am the anti-imperialist and I am the anti-American American leader. But now they want Donald Trump to intervene into Pakistani state and get Imran Khan out of jail. Although the situation here in Pakistan is very how to say it. It is at a point where anything could happen at any time. Any small incident can erupt into a mass movement in the urban centers of Pakistan. Of course, there are formidable movements in the periphery, in Pakhtunkhwa against military operation and establishment. In Balochistan, there is a secession movement that is growing in its popularity with every day, and they want to. There is another secession on the horizon, just like Bangladesh. And then there is a movement in Pakistan administered Jammu Kashmir, which is if I may, which is the Achilles heel of this subcontinent. And if anything that erupts in Jammu Kashmir, or either on this part of the line of control or the Indian held Jammu Kashmir, it can have massive impacts across South Asia. But the urban centers, there's still very little movement. As far as the impact of Bangladeshi movement in Pakistan, we just saw that a spark of student movement or a student protest across Pakistan in response to allegedly there was an incident reported that a student was brutally raped and by the administration of a college, private college. But then, although there were the reports could not be verified, but students were so fed up and they were so eager to come out that they in just 2 days they just they made a huge problem for the state. So there are signs, and it was very much inspired by the current Bangladeshi movement. The visuals and the way they acted and they responded, you could see those influences from Bangladesh infiltrating into the Pakistani movement. And Pakistani student movement, of course, has a historical connection as well, as I mentioned, in 68, 69. So there is that. If I am so what is to be done? The point is that right now there is not a large working class party and internationalist party that could connect with the Indian proletariat and Indian working class or Pakistan. Of course, there are groups that are trying to do that, and we are also in contact with them, and we are trying to build that bridge between India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, so that, of course, we do not believe in all borders, but this division that has been created in India, it is such a stupid division that it doesn't make any sense to anyone who thinks straight. So we are also making our efforts. There are groups in Bangladesh that want to create a party and a socialist revolution, and there are groups in India as well. So we are trying to infiltrate, and I'll end with this, that, as I mentioned, that there is a trend of starting to label the movement as fundamentalist or backed by CIA or this and that instantly. And I think the purpose, the question that should always be in front of the subjective revolutionary element is not about the more than what is this movement. It should be how to intervene in it and how to direct it towards a revolutionary direction, rather than just sitting down and just mindlessly throwing labels at the movements, and which I think we should all together strive for an internationalist party that could be that could lead the working class from Bangladesh across the world into a world. And I'll mention one more thing. There is a climate crisis that is on the horizon as well, and it is going to create havocs across South Asia especially. And there is an expected millions of people are going to will be forced to migrate from Dhaka, which is the capital of Bangladesh, and we are seeing smog, the air that we are breathing right now in Rawalpindi or in Lahore or in Delhi or in the northern India is unbreathable, and it is going to kill us all. So this is also going to be a major factor that is going to play into the movements in near future. So I'm very hopeful. This movement has, and although and other movements has given me and our comrades, and I think across the world, a kind of a hope in a time where we see is despair and darkness. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I was going to bring Sana in next, but she seems to have vanished. So Roy, you had your hand up. Do you want to go next? Can you manage to unmute yourself? You're muted. I'll tell you what, Sana's still here. Oh no, you go next now. Go, carry on, yeah. Sana, who wants to go first out of Sana and Roy? Have you a preference?
Well, you can go ahead. It's fine with me.
Okay, thanks, Sana. Go on, Roy. can't actually hear you, Roy. Have you unmuted? We can't actually hear you. Can everybody hear me okay? Can you somebody put the hand up if you can hear me okay? Right, so you can hear me. Right, Sana, do you want to go next? Roy, you may need to leave and come back into the meeting if you've lost your sound. That sometimes fixes it. Because you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Can you hear me all right, yeah? Roy, can you put your hand up if you can hear me? So you go ahead. I'll send Roy a message to say, you know, we can't seem to communicate. Do you want to go next?
Comrade, thank you so much.
Yeah, right. Okay, you go ahead.
Okay, am I audible?
Yeah, we could hear you fine. Thanks.
Comrade Umar, thank you so much for a wonderful, very comprehensive contribution. English isn't my first language, so if I break into Urdu in the middle of my question, please do. I think Comrade Umar can translate for me. I hope that's okay with everybody. Umar, मेरा basically question ये है कि हमने काफ़ी ना ये CIA की इन्वॉल्वमेंट को डिसमिस कर दिया है इस सारी सिचुएशन में and you basically argue that like the CIA couldn't have been involved because like they lack the ability to mobilize such large numbers of people like on the ground. But I mean, historically, if we look at it, the CIA interventions often don't start from like the ground up, right? They often they focus on hijacking existing movements, right? And वो काफी backdoor किस्म के तरीके से करते हैं. और फिर given कि अब मोहम्मद यूनुस जो है उसका फेस बन गया है, it's someone with like a very well known history, tied to the World Bank, tied to the IMF, tied to, you know, the structural adjustment programs of the 70s, and then becoming the face for microfinance, and you know वो सारा कुछ ठीक है. और फिर we also know that उसकी पूरी बकायदा एक history है with the army establishment in Bangladesh, right? Who have already made him multiple offers to come into government from a coalition government, right? And so ये सारी चीज़ें हमें पता है. तो मुझे लगता है कि this strongly suggests कि reactionary intervention एक है. I know कि इसको हम कैसे, how do we like reconcile this with like revolutionary aspirations or सारा कुछ काम, maybe perhaps we're being like overly optimistic at this point. I'm not saying कि जिस तरह अभी तुमने कहा है ना कि हमारा काम ये नहीं है कि हम जज करें, so you already partially answered my question, but still I think कि ज़्यादा खतरनाक नहीं होगा अगर हम cautious नहीं होते और हम ये समझते नहीं है कि इसके पीछे जो सारी I mean obvious से इशारे हैं कि intervention किसकी है, शक्ल किसकी है, इसका face कौन है, ये सारी चीज़ें. तो इसके बारे में I mean if you have something to say about that and maybe how that could be handled. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Sana. Roy, should we try you again? And does anybody else want to speak, or does anybody want to make a second contribution? Because we've got quite a bit of time available yet. So put your hands up if you do. Roy. No, we can't hear you. Can't hear you. Do you want to leave the meeting and come back? Rejoin the meeting. Right, I think Roy's got technical problems there. Okay, anybody else want to say anything while Roy's rejoining the meeting? Do you want to answer that last question, Omar? Omar, do you want to respond to Sana's question while we're waiting for Roy to come back?
Yeah. It is a valid question. Comrade was not present during my opening statement. I tried to tackle this question, even in my contribution as well. I'm not saying that I'm not ruling out the intervention of CIA or the imperialist powers. As I said, that every political movement that disrupts the status quo and disrupts the power structures and cannot actually completely destroy capitalism and build socialism So it will open opportunities for all sorts of powers. So there's that. The reason I said that CIA was not behind the movement is to debunk the argument that this whole movement was somehow it was a conspiracy of CIA, and they were behind this all this movement and student movement. Obviously, they can exploit it, and we have seen that if the subjective element is not sharp enough or is not organized enough or it cannot lead the movement into a decisive victory, often there is a counter revolution, and they all sorts of imperialist power can come back in power, and they have actually, as Sana correctly points out, that they have a stooge uh, uh, in the interim government in form of Dr. Yunus, and but the point was that Dr. Yunus was not nominated by military or CIA at that time. The military wanted to take power and through that coup establish the status quo again. But the movement was so forceful that they denied them this right, and they said that we are going to decide what the next government is going to look like. Although, as I mentioned, they are students. They think that this Dr. Yunus, which has been portrayed as a face of human capitalism. There is an excellent article by Comrade Sana on Asian Marxist Review on microfinance as well, and which she discusses this whole humane capitalism and the phenomena like Dr. Yunus. So they have that impact on it. But we'll see how the events are going to fold. There is an opportunity for CIA, and there is an opportunity for the students and the workers as well to move forward. So as long as the movement is there, it is intact, it will be not easy for anyone to hijack it, for at least for now. So that's what I believe. I hope for the best. I think that we should in every way possible we should aid, and we should support our friends in Bangladesh, and try to direct them or help them build a new party. But we'll see what happens. Of course, there is an opportunity for everyone right now.
Okay, thanks. So we still don't seem to have Roy Chessie, unfortunately. Does anybody else want to come back and raise any further points or add anything or ask any more questions, even if you've been in already? Right, well, I mean, if there's nobody wanting to say anything else, I think we just have to ask Omar if he wants to make any closing comments, really. I don't see any hands.
I have.
Don't see. Yeah.
Can I
Sorry?
speak? Yeah. I don't think I have anything much to add to the conversation right now. I think if Comrade Roger will be kind enough to conclude the meeting, so I would love to hear him. What's his thoughts?
Okay. Roger?
Well, I'm flattered by the invitation. I'm not sure that I can add anything. I think Omar has done an absolutely spectacular job explaining the whole situation. I do agree with just the one point. I'd like to reinforce the point that he made just at the end there, that I mean, the CIA, there is a tendency for some conspiracy theorists to think that everything that happens is somehow controlled by a secret mechanism, and that the CIA are behind it. The CIA is, of course, the intelligence agency of the American ruling class, and of course they will try to exploit every situation that they can. But the idea that they initiate such a movement for some devious motivations of their own, I think, is just a fantasy. They they stepped in quickly when they saw the movement developing, and they managed to shoehorn in Dr. Yunus into the situation to take over, to in effect to become to hold back the movement and to give some illusion that some reforms were about to take place. But that's a stopgap measure, which I don't think the CIA has much control. In that sense, we have to say we do not want to take away the credit for this massive, courageous, heroic, self-sacrificing movement of the youth and of the students who again and again, braving the bullets of the regime, continued to stand out and to surge through the streets and to take over, and did not give up, did not give an inch until they'd rid themselves of this corrupt, brutal government. Of course, it's not the end of the story, but I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. Of course, the problem about, without a working class, without a revolutionary working class party that can actually offer a program and a perspective for a future reorganization of society, without that, then all of our movements are doomed in Bangladesh and everywhere else in the world. There are no revolutionary mass workers' parties at the moment, and that's part of the reason I'm not claiming that WIN is any more than a small discussion circle at the moment. But the reason why we're meeting is precisely to do our bit to try to create a cadre, a conscious element within the working class. All of our comrades are active within, in one way or another, within the working class movement, and to make contact with other groups and bigger groups and mass organizations like the trade unions and student organizations too, and so on, in order to spread our ideas and to focus attention on the needs of the situation. But unless in the long run, I don't think the deadline is not tomorrow, but unless we succeed in building a mass workers' party, an international, a party which would number millions and maybe tens of millions, unless we succeed in doing that in the period ahead, then of course the world is doomed one way, well, in many ways, some of which, Omar has already given quite a frightening picture of the climatic crisis, apart from all the other crises, world war, world recession and slump, and all the other horrors that are confronting the working class. But we have to try, we have to fight, and we have to continue to spread these ideas. And there are a whole generation or generations of workers and youth who are determined to succeed, and that's what we base our whole activity upon. So I'll finish on that, comrades.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Carol, you got your hand up, Carol?
Yep,
Yeah.
I have a couple of one quick thought and a question. A number of years back, Roger mentioned this before, when these women, these textile workers, went into the factories, and the factories fell on top of them, and their bosses said, if you leave, this is before the accident, and don't come back, essentially. There was a big movement of textile workers in Bangladesh, and it was so important that in the United States, people got on board, and a lot of people supported that movement. And so I'm wondering what happened, because it was so important and meaningful and encompassed so many people. And the other thing is that what was the reaction of the Bangladeshi uprising to the 250 million farmers and workers that were out on strike in India? Is there any, I'm hearkening back to internationalism again, but is there any question about that and general strikes? And what are the unions doing in terms of building, you know, any sort of workers' movement, if any? Where I know there are unions, and so what are the bureaucrats doing essentially?
To respond to that, as there's no more hands up.
Well, I have yet to go back and look what happened to that movement. Of course, that it was a very formidable movement, and it not only engulfed the working class in Bangladesh, but across world and in the region. And as I mentioned in my earlier contributions, that there is a working class movement brewing in Bangladesh, and we see glimpses of it. It may be the movement that erupted through that terrible incident of thousands of women and children essentially murdered and burned in those factories. And also just at the hour of the victory, there were protests by the workers of the banks in Bangladesh, which was very optimistic at that time. It could not grew into something big, but these are the signs that in coming future, Bangladesh can erupt into a working class movement as well. And it has been somewhat delayed by this ousting of Hasina Wajid. The reason military interrupted and forced Hasina Wajid out of power was the fear that it can spread across the working class and become something else that could essentially wrap up the entire system. So of course there are movements, there are the of working class. They're getting politicized, especially the textile industry, where the conditions are dire, as you all know. As far as the second question is concerned, what are the trade unions are doing? They are doing what they always do. They are doing the bidding of the ruling class and the capitalists, and they are essentially, at least in Pakistan or even in India, and they are a huge hurdle for the working class to actually come onto the stage of the history right now. In India, of course, there is this phenomenon of the Communist Party. It's a huge Communist Party with huge membership that is essentially ideologically and politically so degenerated that they have, even in this election, they have to they aligned with the Congress Party, and they are basically operating under the shadows of the Congress Party, the long-standing two-stage theory of the Communist Party of India. So the party itself is a problem there. As far as the farmers' movement is concerned, I don't think there can be a correlation right now, because that movement, uh, it was the only movement that actually defeated Modi on ground. The farmers' movement, especially of the farmers of Punjab, there were they were trying to privatize the farm industry, and it was a movement, and they became successful, and it ended there. And right now, the epicenter of that movement was Punjab, and Punjab is somewhat becoming. The movement was essentially, there was no subjective element, so it was captured by Aam Aadmi Party, the common man's party or common people's party, and they are in power right now. But those laws that Modi wanted to introduce were revoked at that time, and the movement was successful. But I don't think that at this stage this movement has any correlation with them. But there is one point that I want to mention: the partition of Bengal, the Bangladesh and the Indian Bengal. So right after the movement's success, there was a movement in Calcutta regarding a fellow doctor who was raped, and I'm sure that there can be a correlation between the two, because they are the same language, and they both are Bengalis, and there is this partition. So it did infiltrate it, and that was the fear of the Indian state. That's why they were so they were so scared that they they engaged in a very ridiculous propaganda against the movement. The Indian media generally is very ridiculous, but they did their best to demonize and to vilify and to create ethnic division inside Bangladesh through their media. So obviously they are scared of this movement. Even Pakistani state, right after that the movement, they started to impose terrible sanctions inside the university campuses against protests, against any kind of movement. And it was a preemptive measure because they knew that something could trigger in Pakistan or in India. So I think if this movement continues, at least in South Asia, a movement in Pakistan will have an effect on in Bangladesh, and the Bangladeshi movement will have its effect on in India. And this is not some abstract idea. We can see those things happening on the ground.
Okay, thanks. So there are no other hands up, so I'm sort of getting the feeling we've perhaps talked out on this subject for this afternoon. No, nobody's coming forward. So I think that's actually the end of the discussion now. I'd like to thank Omar for making such an amazing, informative and stimulating lead off and answering all those questions, and also to thank all the comrades who have made individual contributions. So we're just going to go to Roger now about next week's meeting.
Yes, actually, next week's meeting has a very close association with what we've been discussing today, because we've already talked about the movement throughout the Indian subcontinent, which is one of the real flashpoints of the world crisis, for reasons which Omar has explained very clearly. So we've given quite a bit of attention in recent months to the situation in Sri Lanka, but there's a new development. Of course, we had the unprecedented victory of a party which previously had led two bloody failed insurrections, the JVP, under a new banner, the NPP. But not only did they win the presidential election, but they've now, just in the last few days, they won a sweeping landslide victory in parliamentary elections, winning actually 62% of the votes and winning more seats in parliament than any Sri Lankan party in history. But and this is really a political manifestation of the revolutionary movement which took place 2 years ago, the so-called Aragalaya, the uprising of the masses. And it's very much a parallel to that's really what gives us some hope. From a kind of elemental mass movement, it's taken a political sharp edge or a political spearhead, which is not it's not going to solve the problem, because same old story. The leadership is now trying to negotiate with the IMF in order to try to really reconcile the demands of the world ruling class and the absolute determination of the masses to improve their living standards from the starvation to which they've been reduced. So the reason I'm putting this in context, it's very. I do hope that Omar and other Pakistani comrades will also participate in the discussion. We've got the comrades who stood very courageously in elections this time. They stood against the JVP or the NPP. They're comrades who've led struggles, trade union leaders, youth, and people with long history and long traditions in the working class. We've invited them, and also, by the way, a breakaway from the JVP, the Frontline Socialist Party, and we've invited them to come and speak. Now, they've spoken before to our meetings about the crisis in Sri Lanka and about the revolutionary movement, but we're particularly asking them now to talk about the campaign, what program they were putting forward, what kind of echo they got from the electorate. They got a very small vote, but it's hardly surprising, because the masses were determined to give an absolutely unequivocal mandate to the JVP or the NPP in order that it couldn't, that it had no excuse to back down from its demands. But you know, the warnings that they've given will stand them in good stead for the future. So I also would like to draw attention to the fact that early in the new year we're going to have a great privilege of a leading trade union militant in India who's going to speak. That's Ashim Roy, who is actually, you could say, the most militant national trade union leader, who led a breakaway from the CPI-M union C2, and he's going to speak to us. I see that Comrade Asit there, who's a member of the CPI trade union, is very pleased to hear that news too. Ashim Roy is going to speak to us, and I have a slightly more optimistic assessment of the situation of the Indian working class. So I think the CPI and the CPI-M have really lost most of the support that they had in the past. They're completely discredited now, and the new openings are taking up, as in Sri Lanka and as in Bangladesh. So I hope to see all the comrades next week.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Just to add a footnote on, I've had a couple of requests for the meeting recording. We do put all our recordings on YouTube shortly after the meeting, and all the links to that and the web page and all the rest of it actually at the bottom of your notification email. They're there every week, so do go on and have a look and subscribe to the Win YouTube channel. And if you want to watch anything again, everything is there. So just to remind comrades of that. But other than that, thank you very much for your attendance. I think that's the end of the meeting, and hopefully we'll see you all next week.
Thank you so much, comrade. It was a pleasure.
Bye. Bye.
Hi, thank you.